Okay, you're thinking about owning a supermarket. From the customer side, it can look almost unbeatable. People need food every week. The parking lot stays active. Baskets keep moving through checkout. And even an ordinary neighborhood store can ring up sales that would make many small businesses look tiny. But grocery retail has a financial contradiction built into it. Huge revenue can sit on top of a very narrow net margin. So the store may handle tens of millions of dollars, while the owner keeps only a small fraction after merchandise. Payroll, occupancy, utilities, losses, maintenance. And financing are paid. The real question is not whether supermarkets can generate sales. They clearly can. The question is how much capital it takes to build or buy one, how the money moves through the operation, where margin is created or destroyed, and how much room the owner actually has for mistakes. The scale is easy to underestimate. FMI's 2025 industry data puts average weekly supermarket sales at about $668,000, which annualizes to roughly $30.8 million. The same dataset puts the average supermarket at about 42,000 square feet, and the average net profit for food retailers at only 2.1%. Those numbers should not be treated as a promise for an independent store, because store formats, regions, product mixes, debt loads, labor costs, and real estate structures vary widely. But they make the basic economics clear. A supermarket can look rich on the sales report while still operating with very little room between success and failure. At a 2.1% net margin, every $100 of revenue corresponds to only a little more than $2 of net profit on an industry average basis. That thin spread changes the way you have to think about ownership. A supermarket is not simply a building full of products with a markup added to each one. It is a high-speed operating system. Thousands of products have to arrive, be received correctly, stored at the right temperature, priced, moved onto shelves, sold before they become obsolete or spoiled, and reordered without creating either empty spaces or excess inventory. The owner is managing inventory velocity, labor productivity, supplier terms, customer traffic, refrigeration, cash flow, food safety, shrink, and competitive pricing at the same time. A mistake that would be annoying in a high-margin business can erase a meaningful part of a supermarket's annual profit. That is what this channel focuses on. Taking a business that looks simple from the customer side and rebuilding the economics from the owner's side. With a supermarket, the first layer is entry cost, and this is where generic internet estimates become dangerous. There is no reliable national price for opening a supermarket, a small neighborhood grocery occupying an existing retail. Shell is a completely different project from a 40,000 square foot full-service store with meat cutting, bakery production, prepared foods, walk-in refrigeration, loading areas, backup systems, and a large parking field. Leasing also produces a very different capital requirement from buying land and constructing the property. If you lease an existing supermarket location, you may avoid the cost of purchasing the building, but you can inherit a different set of expenses. Security deposits, tenant improvements, electrical upgrades, plumbing, floor repairs, refrigeration replacement, fire systems, signage, permits, and rent that begins before the store reaches normal sales. If the location was previously used for another kind of retail, the conversion can become much more expensive because grocery stores demand heavy electrical capacity. Drainage, food preparation infrastructure, refrigerated cases, walk-ins, freezers, loading access, and specialized ventilation. A cheap empty box can become an expensive grocery project once the equipment plan is drawn. Buying the property moves money into real estate instead of rent, but it raises the initial capital requirement and creates a financing burden. Ground-up development can add land acquisition, site work, parking, stormwater systems, utility connections, construction, professional fees, and months of carrying costs before opening day. The property may eventually become a valuable asset separate from the operating business, but appreciation should never be confused with operating profit. The grocery operation still has to pay its bills every week. And a valuable building does not rescue a store whose shelves are moving too slowly, or whose labor and merchandise costs are out of control. Then comes refrigeration, one of the defining capital expenses in grocery retail. A supermarket may need display cases for dairy, meat, frozen foods, produce, beverages, prepared foods, and specialty departments, plus walk-in coolers and freezers behind the sales floor. The real cost is not just the boxes customers see, it includes compressors, condensers, piping, controls, electrical work, installation, monitoring, maintenance access and replacement planning. EPA's Energy Star program notes that refrigeration can account for as much as 40% of a grocery store's total energy use. So the refrigeration system affects both the opening budget and the store's recurring utility bill. Equipment continues beyond refrigeration. A full-service store can require checkout lanes, self-checkout stations, scales, slicers, ovens, proofers, hot food equipment, meat room equipment, shelving, carts, pallet jacks, compactors, security systems, office equipment, point-of-sale hardware, networking, backup power arrangements, and software subscriptions. None of those assets produce revenue by themselves. They create the capacity to operate. The owner still needs opening inventory, cash for payroll, deposits with vendors or utilities where required, insurance, licensing, marketing, cleaning supplies, uniforms, spare parts, and a working capital reserve for the period when the store is open but not yet performing as expected. Financing can reduce the amount of cash paid on day one. But it does not reduce the economic cost of the project. It converts part of that cost into future principal and interest payments. SBA-backed programs can be relevant for qualifying U.S. small businesses, but they have program limits and eligibility requirements. A 7A loan can be used for purposes including real estate, equipment, inventory, working capital, or a business acquisition, while the 504 program is designed mainly for major fixed assets. The important ownership lesson is simpler than the program details. A supermarket that barely works before debt service may not work after debt service. Now, look at the operating statement. The largest expense is the merchandise itself. Before the store can earn $1 of gross profit, it has to pay for food, beverages, household goods, and the cost of getting those products into the retail system. Large public grocers report gross margins that are far above their final net margins because gross profit still has to support payroll, rent, depreciation, utilities, technology, insurance, repairs, administrative expenses, and other overhead. That difference between gross margin and net margin is one of the most important concepts in this business. A 20-something% gross margin does not mean the owner is keeping 20-something cents from every sales dollar. Kroger, for example, reported FIFO gross margins around the low 20% range during 2025, while its calculation still excluded several costs that ultimately sit below that merchandising measure. Labor is another major pressure point because supermarkets are labor-intensive in ways customers rarely notice. Someone receives the truck, checks deliveries, rotates stock, fills shelves, cleans spills, watches temperatures, cuts meat, prepares deli food, bakes products, manages cash, handles online orders, assists customers, verifies prices, deals with vendors, and closes the store. BLS data for food and beverage stores shows that many common grocery occupations sit in the mid to high teens per hour nationally, while supervisors and specialized roles cost more. The employer's real payroll expense can also include payroll taxes, benefits, workers' compensation, overtime, training, and the cost of filling vacancies. Staffing has a second-order effect on profit. Cutting too many labor hours can make payroll look better for a week, while damaging sales and increasing losses. Shelves stay empty longer. Produce is not cold quickly enough. Receiving errors go unnoticed. Checkout lines grow. Prepared food counters close early. Customers stop finding what they came for. In a thin-margin business, the cheapest schedule is not automatically the most profitable schedule. The owner has to find the labor level that keeps the store stocked, clean, accurate, safe, and fast, without allowing payroll to grow faster than the sales base can support. Utilities behave differently from labor, because much of the energy load continues, whether the store is crowded or quiet. Refrigerated cases do not stop cooling because Tuesday afternoon is slow. Freezers, ventilation, lighting, hot water systems, bakery equipment, and HVAC keep drawing power. That creates operating leverage in both directions. When sales rise while fixed and semi-fixed costs stay controlled, profit can improve quickly. When sales fall, many of those costs do not fall with them. A store can lose several points of revenue and discover that the expense structure barely moved. EPA's grocery guidance specifically identifies refrigeration as an unusually important component of store energy consumption. Shrink is another margin destroyer, but it is broader than shoplifting. Grocery shrink can include theft, scanning errors, damaged goods, vendor discrepancies, poor rotation, receiving mistakes, spoiled product, markdowns, and inventory records that do not match reality. Fresh departments make the problem more visible because a carton of cereal can wait, while strawberries, leafy greens, meat, seafood, and prepared foods are working against the clock. USDA research has long documented meaningful retail-level losses for fresh produce, with rates varying dramatically by item. The useful lesson is not one universal spoilage percentage. It is that a fresh department can have an attractive gross margin and still underperform if too much product is discarded or discounted. This is why ordering discipline matters so much. Too little inventory creates stockouts and lost sales. Too much inventory creates waste, cash tied up on shelves, and unnecessary markdowns. A good grocery operator is constantly balancing service level against carrying cost. The objective is not to make the back room look full. It is to have the right product available when the customer wants it, in the right quantity, with enough remaining shelf life to sell at the intended price. That is an inventory problem, a forecasting problem, and a labor execution problem at the same time. The revenue side is more interesting than simply sell groceries. Different departments contribute different combinations of traffic, margin, labor, and spoilage risk. Dry grocery and household staples can create dependable volume and give customers a reason to return regularly. Fresh produce can reinforce the perception of quality and freshness. Meat and seafood can drive basket size, but require skilled handling and strict temperature control. Bakery and prepared foods add labor and food safety complexity, yet they can create value by selling convenience rather than raw ingredients alone. A customer comparing 2 bags of flour may focus heavily on price. A customer buying a ready-to-eat dinner is paying partly to avoid cooking. That is one reason many grocers continue investing in food service. FMI's 2026 industry research says a large majority of surveyed food retailers plan to increase space allocated to food service, including fresh prepared grab-and-go options. The strategy makes sense when executed well. Transform ingredients, labor, and store capacity into a product customers perceive as more convenient. But higher selling prices do not automatically mean higher net profit. Prepared food also brings waste risk, staffing requirements, equipment maintenance, cleaning, packaging, and food safety controls. The department has to earn enough gross profit to justify all of that additional complexity. FMI reports that 77% of food retailers surveyed plan to increase food service space. Private label products provide another lever. A retailer's own brands can offer more control over assortment, positioning, and economics than nationally advertised brands, and large grocers have invested heavily in them. Kroger, for example, reported in its 2026 annual filing that its supermarkets average more than 13,000 private label items. But there is no universal percentage of private label that guarantees the best profit for every store. The right mix depends on customer expectations, category, supplier relationships, local competition, quality perception, and the retailer's ability to source consistently. National brands can still be essential because customers may enter the store expecting to find them. Supplier terms add a less visible financial advantage. Grocery customers usually pay immediately at checkout, while retailers may receive time to pay approved supplier invoices. When inventory sells before the related supplier bill is due, the store can temporarily operate with working capital supplied by the trade cycle. That can be powerful because grocery inventory moves frequently, but it should not be mistaken for free permanent money. The payable still comes due. If the owner uses that temporary cash for unrelated spending, slows inventory turns, or allows obsolete stock to accumulate, the same working capital structure that looked helpful can create a cash squeeze. Inventory turnover is therefore one of the quiet engines of the business. A thin profit on a product can still be attractive if the same shelf space and working capital are reused repeatedly throughout the year. That is why grocery operators care so much about sales per square foot, sales per labor hour, category productivity, and days of inventory. The business is trying to earn a small return many times rather than a huge return once. Slow products are not just disappointing sellers. They occupy shelf space, consume working capital, increase handling, and block faster items from using the same space. FMI's current operating benchmarks include measures such as sales per square foot and sales per labor hour, precisely because productivity matters so much in food retail. Digital ordering complicates the model. FMI reports that online sales represented 8.9% of grocery item sales in 2025, and the average online supermarket transaction was more than twice the average in-store transaction. That larger basket can look attractive until the owner accounts for fulfillment. Somebody or something has to pick the order, manage substitutions, stage refrigerated and frozen items, handle bags, process pickup, or cover delivery economics. A store that treats online sales as identical to in-store sales can misunderstand its true margin. The correct question is contribution after the extra labor, technology, picking, packaging, payment, and delivery-related costs. FMI lists average 2025. Transaction values of $49.06 in-store and $106 online. Competition makes execution harder because the independent owner is not setting prices in a vacuum. A conventional supermarket may compete with supercenters, warehouse clubs, hard discounters, specialty grocers, convenience stores, dollar stores, online platforms, meal delivery, and other supermarkets. Each competitor can subsidize traffic differently. A warehouse club can earn membership income in addition to merchandise margin. Costco reported more than $5.3 billion in membership fee revenue in fiscal 2025, and a US and Canada renewal rate above 92%. An independent supermarket cannot simply copy the shelf price of a membership warehouse and assume the economics will match. Costco's 2025 filing reports, LOV, $5.323 billion in membership fee revenue and a 92.3% US-Canada renewal rate. Location is therefore about more than traffic count. The owner has to understand the trade area, population, household composition, income, commuting patterns, nearby competitors, parking, road access, visibility, delivery access, local labor supply, crime exposure, zoning, and the type of grocery trip the location can realistically win. A beautifully built store can fail in a trade area that does not need another supermarket. A modest store can perform well if it fills a clear gap. The lease should be tested against realistic sales, not optimistic sales, because rent remains due even when customers shop somewhere else. Regulation adds another layer. Food handling, meat processing, prepared foods, weights and measures, employment practices, accessibility, fire protection, refrigeration, waste disposal, signage. Alcohol sales and building work can involve federal, state, and local rules. Alcohol licensing in particular varies enormously by jurisdiction, so a national liquor license price is misleading. In some places, licenses are administrative and relatively straightforward. In others, availability is restricted or transferable licenses trade at high market values. The owner has to budget for the rules that apply to the exact state, county, city, and store concept, rather than importing a number from another market. Now, consider a simplified ownership model. Maya is evaluating a full-service neighborhood supermarket whose projected sales are close to the FMI weekly industry benchmark, about $668,000 annualized. That is roughly $34.8 million of revenue. If the business ultimately produced a 2.1% net margin, the arithmetic would imply about $730,000 of net profit before deciding how much belongs economically to Maya's labor, how much must remain in the company, and how much cash is required for debt principal, future equipment replacement, expansion, or unexpected repairs. This is not a forecast. It is simply a way to show how a very large sales figure can compress into a much smaller final result. The benchmark inputs come from FMI's 2025 industry data. The modeled result is arithmetic, not an earnings promise. Now change only a few assumptions. Suppose merchandise costs rise slightly, labor scheduling becomes inefficient, refrigeration needs an expensive repair, fresh food waste increases, and local competition forces more promotional pricing. Revenue could remain near the same level while the net margin falls sharply. A decline from 2.1% to 1% on $34.8 million of sales reduces modeled net profit from roughly $730,000 to about $348,000. If the store is heavily financed, that difference can determine whether the owner has comfortable cash flow or spends the year protecting liquidity. The danger is not always a dramatic collapse in sales. Sometimes it is several ordinary operating problems arriving together.
The reverse is also true. A store does not need a spectacular pricing strategy to improve results.
Better ordering can reduce waste. Better receiving can catch shortages and invoice errors. Strong scheduling can keep shelves filled without excessive overtime. Energy improvements can lower utility cost. A stronger prepared food program can increase gross profit dollars if demand supports it. Better private label sourcing can improve category economics. A lease renegotiation, where possible, can reduce occupancy pressure.
None of these improvements sounds glamorous.
But in a business with a net margin around 2%, small improvements can matter enormously when applied across tens of millions of dollars of sales. So what does supermarket ownership realistically require? First, enough capital to survive more than the opening day. Second, operating disciplines strong enough to manage thousands of low-margin decisions repeatedly. Third, a location and format that have a clear reason to exist in the local market.
Fourth, management that understands the difference between gross profit, net profit, cash flow, and owner compensation. Fifth, the willingness to reinvest because refrigeration, fixtures, technology, and buildings wear out. And finally, enough financial flexibility to absorb the periods when costs rise faster than prices or customers change where and how they shop. The attraction is still real.
Food demand is persistent. Good stores can build deep relationships with their communities, and the scale of grocery sales can support substantial businesses.
But necessity does not guarantee profitability.
Customers needing food does not guarantee they need your store, and a busy parking lot does not tell you what remains after every invoice clears. That is the central ownership lesson. The supermarket is a volume business where operational precision determines how much of the volume becomes profit. If you are evaluating an actual supermarket,
the sensible next step is not to multiply a national revenue average by a national margin and call that your expected income. You would need location-specific sales history or a credible forecast, department-level margins, payroll, lease or mortgage terms,
utility history, equipment condition, shrink, inventory aging, supplier terms, debt obligations, licensing requirements, and enough working capital for realistic downside cases.
A supermarket can process more money in a week than some businesses see in a year and still be financially fragile.
That is what makes it fascinating. The shelves are only the visible layer. Underneath them is a machine converting inventory, labor, electricity, square footage, supplier credit, and customer traffic into a few cents of final profit from each sales dollar. Ownership works when that machine is controlled relentlessly.
It fails when small leaks are ignored because the revenue number looks impressive.
In grocery retail, the headline number is sales. The number that decides whether you actually own a good business is what remains after the entire system has been paid for.